The NFL rumor mill is churning out some massive news about the LA Chargers with a potential trade that could shake up the league. Let's analyze this situation and take a closer look at their playoff picture. What's up, buddies? Welcome back. If you are new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We cover all AFC West news here on this channel. Now, here's something that caught our attention. Tyreek Hill is being listed as a favorite to land with the Chargers, according to Bovada officials. But they're not alone. The odds show both the Chargers and Raiders as potential destinations. The Raiders showing interest makes perfect sense given their track record. They've always been willing to take chances on veteran players, no matter how it turns out in the end. But seeing the Chargers in the mix, that's what's really interesting here. Vegas odds makers know their stuff. They don't put these odds out there randomly. They're in the business of making money, not losing it, so when they release odds like this, it's worth taking notice. What's your take on this? Would you pull the trigger on a Tyreek Hill trade if you were calling the shots for the Chargers? And which playoff opponent would you prefer to face? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's talk about the playoff situation for the Chargers. They're essentially locked into a wild card position. Winning the division isn't happening at this point, which means they'll be hitting the road for the postseason. Looking at potential first-round matchups, the Houston Texans at NRG Stadium stands out as one possibility. From my analysis, this could actually be the most favorable scenario for the Chargers. The odds makers have ranked 5 possible opponents from best to worst matchups, and they've got it right, putting the Texans at the top. When we look at how these teams match up, the Texans present a unique challenge, but it's one that the Chargers might handle better than other potential opponents. Their recent performance patterns and team dynamics all point to why this could be their best option for a wildcard game. The Texans matchup is genuinely fascinating when we break it down. There's still a bit of a question mark, especially at quarterback, which actually makes them an attractive playoff matchup for the Chargers. When you look at their recent performances, there's a mix of impressive wins and some head-scratching moments, which is exactly what you'd expect from a young team finding its identity. That inconsistency could work in the Chargers' favor in a playoff situation. Now, moving through these potential matchups quickly, the Steelers' situation is particularly interesting because you're dealing with an outdoor game. But I actually like this matchup. Both teams mirror each other's physical style, fitting that Ravens-Steelers mold we've seen for years. Makes sense why this could work in the Chargers' favor, especially with all the questions surrounding Russell Wilson's current form. The Steelers have had their own offensive struggles, and in a head-to-head battle, the Chargers' defense might have the upper hand. The Chiefs? Well, they're probably not even going to be in the mix since they're looking at a first-round bye. Then you've got the Ravens and Bills. Those are absolute powerhouses, no question about it. Again, that Chiefs mention feels odd since they're likely to avoid that first round entirely. Both the Ravens and Bills present serious challenges with their dynamic offenses and solid defensive units. Personally, I'd want to see that Texans matchup. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now let's talk about what we're seeing with this Chargers team. They've built something really solid here. A defense that consistently keeps them in games, plus they've got a phenomenal quarterback who can create plays when they need them. But there's something missing, that explosive element, that spark on the outside. That's exactly why this Tyreek Hill connection makes so much sense. Hill's ability to take the top off a defense would add a completely new dimension to their offense. Looking at their current situation, losing Gus Edwards for the next game is tough, though they're holding out hope for JK Dobbins' return. This whole situation really highlights why the Chargers' offseason approach was so smart. They brought in guys they were familiar with from their Ravens connections, but let's be real, we all saw this coming. These are players who, while talented, have had their share of injury concerns and aren't exactly known for being explosive playmakers. It was a calculated risk that gave them a solid floor, but maybe not the ceiling they ultimately needed. Right now, they're working with what they've got: Kimani Vidal and Hassan Haskins, plus the option to elevate Jarrett Patterson. Haskins, coming from Michigan, is actually a pretty interesting case. His professional trajectory is following his college pattern perfectly, starts off under the radar, gradually gets more opportunities, and then suddenly, he's making a real impact. We saw that progression continue last week, and there's reason to believe he could step up even more if given the chance. The big picture here is that while they have some guys out, these aren't season-ending situations. Sure, they've got several questionable players. That's just the nature of this time in the season. Every team is dealing with injuries and roster management challenges, but if Dobbins can't go, they're looking at relying heavily on Vidal and Haskins. It's not ideal, but they're not completely out of option. These guys have shown flashes when given opportunities. This situation actually ties into their future planning. Instead of going all in on veterans like Tyreek Hill, they could focus on the draft. They've already shown they can draft well. They got that offensive lineman last year and added a solid linebacker. Now they could look at adding explosive playmakers at receiver and running back. This approach would give them more long-term stability and help them build around Herbert's prime years. There's this recent mock draft that's got them landing a potential Heisman candidate running back at pick 25. Think about that. The Chargers make the playoffs, maybe win a game, and still end up with a game-changing talent in the mid-20s. Start stacking draft classes like that with Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh. That's when things get really interesting. We've seen what Harbaugh can do with young talent, and adding explosive players through the draft could set them up for sustained success. Ashton Gentry, the prospect they're linked to in the draft, put up absolutely insane numbers. 2,500 yards, nearly 30 touchdowns, averaging 7.5 yards per carry at Boise State. When you look at those stats, they're mind-blowing, regardless of the competition level. Sure, people question the competition in the Mountain West, but consider this. His offensive line wasn't stacked with five-star recruits either. He was producing those numbers with average talent around him. That's what makes his potential even more intriguing. Imagine what he could do with NFL-level blocking and Justin Herbert keeping defenses honest. Speaking of the offensive setup, this is where things get really interesting for the Chargers. They've already got solid tight end depth, which gives them flexibility in their offensive schemes. Adding an explosive running back through the draft could completely transform how defenses have to play them. Right now, teams can focus on containing Herbert in the passing game, but add in a dynamic runner who can break long plays. That changes everything. The defensive side is another reason for optimism. Jesse Minter's system has proven to be incredibly adaptable. It's like a plug-and-play setup. While individual talent matters, the system itself creates opportunities for players to succeed. This kind of defensive framework is exactly what you need in today's NFL, especially in the AFC where you're regularly facing elite quarterbacks. When you look at the AFC landscape, that's where this all comes together. You've got to deal with Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson, three of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the league. The Chargers have built a defense that can at least keep them in these games. Sure, some matchups might turn into shootouts in the mid-30s, but that's just the reality of modern NFL football. The key is having a defense that can get those one or two crucial stops that make the difference in a playoff game. Looking ahead, the Chargers' position is actually really strong. They're in the playoffs, they've got their franchise quarterback, a proven head coach, and a defensive system that works. The draft capital they have could help them address their needs for explosiveness on offense without breaking the bank on veteran trades. While someone like Tyreek Hill would be an immediate impact player, the smarter long-term play might be building through the draft and developing young talent. The Chargers are gearing up for two crucial matchups that could define their season: tomorrow night's game against the Patriots and a divisional clash with the Raiders on January 5th. Looking at where they stand, being second in the AFC West shows just how competitive they've been this season. Now, let's talk about the injury situation because it's getting pretty interesting. The backfield is especially concerning with both JK Dobbins and Gus Edwards dealing with injuries. While Dobbins is showing positive signs by progressing to full participation and is listed as questionable, Edwards is officially out with that ankle issue. This puts a lot of pressure on their running game. The offensive line takes a hit with Trey Pipkins being ruled out due to a hip injury, while the tight end situation is worth watching. Both Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst are questionable. Hurst's status is particularly concerning since he's been dealing with a hip injury and didn't participate in Thursday's practice. On defense, they'll be without Denzel Perryman, which is a significant loss for their linebacker core. Elijah Molden's knee issue has him questionable, though he's been able to maintain limited participation throughout the week. The good news is that some players like Cam Hart, Tony Jefferson, and Otito Ogbonnia have shown improvement throughout the week, with Hart and Ogbonnia working their way back to full participation. These injuries could really impact their game plan against the Patriots tomorrow night, where they'll need all hands on deck to maintain their position in the AFC West. Now it's your turn to weigh in. Would you pull the trigger on a Tyreek Hill trade? Or do you think focusing on the draft is the smarter move? If you were drafting, would you prioritize an explosive running back like Ashton Gentry or look for more depth at wide receiver? And let's talk playoffs. Who do you think is the best matchup for the Chargers in the first round? The Texans, Steelers, or maybe another dark horse? Share your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. How do you see the next few games shaping up for the Chargers? If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for all the latest on AFC West news and analysis.